Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Alastair, Stewart and Tibor, Laczko. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today we're going to be talking about some of the more technical questions associated with the payment card industry data security standard, or PCI DSS, with a particular focus on serverless systems. So to start things off, guys, can I just ask, when we talk about serverless in a PCI setting, what do we actually mean, and how does this differ from how cloud providers usually describe it?
So it's usually pitched as platform as a service these days, whereby you use one of the big cloud providers like Amazon, Google, or whatever, etc., but you don't have any input into the infrastructure. The infrastructure, the servers, the traditional stuff that sits underneath it, you don't see any of it. You simply put your code in, put your applications in, and you run it. And a lot of, certainly some more of my clients these days are now using those environments to put their PCI applications in, either their web pages, their payment, e-commerce environments, or whatever other systems they've got that are handling card data. Normally it would be in a cloud environment where they have to build servers and set up virtual networks and stuff. They don't have to do any of that now. They simply put their application up and they run it in this essentially serverless environment.
Yeah, the name is in the clue is in the name, right? As you said. No servers, no physical devices. So your provider runs the platform, you run the code on it. But I think when it comes to serverless, at least what I see is sometimes they think no servers, no responsibility. That doesn't mean that. Like the customer still needs to run their code. They still need to. So anything sits on top of the physical layer, the client is responsible for generating logs, access control, all of that part.
Yeah, I mean, there are still physical servers somewhere underneath. It's just you as a user can't see them. You simply don't have any input into them. So you still got to log in. You still got to do all the things you normally do. It's just that you're offloading more of the environment to the provider than you were previously, I guess. Probably the simplest way of thinking about it.
So what should a QSA look for when deciding whether a serverless system falls within PCI scope, especially when so much of the technology is hidden behind the scenes?
The concept doesn't change. Does it store, process, transmit cardholder data? Does it have the ability to impact the security of the data? I think your scoping principles are the same.
Yeah, so certainly from a customer who's using these environments point of view, the scoping doesn't change. You know, are they putting card systems in it? Are they putting systems that handle or store card data in it? I guess where it's going to become complex is if you're assessing the actual cloud provider for PCI compliance, is what parts of the underlying system that they're providing as part of their platform are in scope. That's where the complexity and detail will come in. But for the end user of those environments, it's not going to change. It's going to be, if you're using it for PCI stuff, it's in PCI scope. It's PCI service.
And how does the balance of responsibilities change when an organization moves from traditional cloud services to serverless? And where do you see the most confusion during assessments?
So what I found with my clients is they're essentially relying a lot more heavily on the provider of the service to do more for them for the PCI service. They're taking the provider's taking on more responsibility, more PCI requirements. And where my clients have fallen down is they've just made assumptions that the provider will do everything for them. What they haven't actually done is looked at the detail of that service and gone, well, actually, which bits of this service are compliant? What's a compliant part of the service? Because about you, Tibor, but when I've looked at these environments, they're incredibly complex. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. And I think there's some sort of a misconception here that like your scope, it doesn't shrink. It sort of like moves a little bit for the responsibility. So you don't have to worry about like you sort of like offload host hardening and OS patching, but you like the focus goes into code, access control, dependencies, secrets, telemetry. So all of that stuff, it's just, I guess, shifting a little bit the responsibility.
So which parts of a serverless setup tend to bring cardholder data into scope unexpectedly? And how can organizations make sure they understand how information moves through their systems?
This is similar to when you're making a payment application, right? Because it's basically code sat in this environment, and the code is handling card data and doing something with cards. So you're going to follow it through in the same way you'd follow through a flow diagram with an application. What's the application doing? Where's it sending that data? Which bits of code are doing what?
I think when unexpected, right? So like side channel. So like you're not responsible for obviously the operating system and the underlying infrastructure, but if there is a failure, so like debugging logs, trace logs, some of these things that an organization not necessarily considering when using a serverless environment. But again, as you said, you just have to, okay, where could it be possible? And then you just sort of like, well, just look, not prove the negative. Well, that kind of proved the negative. So if there is a failure of a webhook or whatever, it's not gonna, retain the entire payload or something.
That's errors in code, error logs and application logs are where we often look for that kind of stuff. Yeah, you're right. And in this environment, those error logs could go to bits that you don't see or don't know, you don't necessarily have control over, because you haven't got control over what's actually running those code or moving those webhooks around, as you say. Yeah,
and it's a little bit like out of sight, out of mind. It's not your responsibility, so you're really looking there for failure, basically. I think.
Yeah, and then it goes back to that responsibility as well. Is the provider saying that their error logging is PCI compliant? Are they checking to see or sanitizing the logs that they get into their environment from your code?
So serverless functions can run for very short periods of time. How should organizations handle PCI requirements for logs monitoring and keeping evidence when the systems they rely on disappear almost instantly?
Well, yeah, that's a tough one.
Runtime.
Runtime. You have to look at it runtime live, don't you? You have to just sit there and look at it in live real time and see what it's doing and what it's pushing out. I guess you can also look at the configuration of the logging systems as to what it should be flagging, even though it's not there. So you can go, well, this is configured to flag this particular type of event, so we know it will, although we can't prove it because it doesn't exist right now. You can see that it should happen. So that's often what we do with new systems when it hasn't been live yet, is we see, assess it on what it should do, not what it is doing.
Yeah,
it is difficult.
And then, in a traditional environment, you'd like, show me the server, show me this and that. And for serverless, it would be like, show me the pipeline, audit trail. So it's a different type of evidence.
Yeah. It should still be, you should still be able to see what it's doing. You should still be able to see and understand what the environment's doing. So you should still be able to evidence that.
Yeah.
And how does access control work in a serverless world, and what should organizations do to make sure that only the right people and systems can run or change those functions?
Traditional access control doesn't change for people, but I guess where the complexity comes in with this is you're going to have a lot of system accounts and service accounts in these environments. You're going to have a lot of accounts that are used by the code or by the code instances to do stuff, and those are not personal accounts, and those still need controlling, managing, maintaining, and securing. Those can run away with you, those system accounts that sit there. For a particular API needs a particular level of access to a database, and that API gets an account with privileges that you don't necessarily consider or think about at the time of creating that account.
Yeah, and then it with version 4, it got its own requirement when we need to look into server system accounts, the non-interactive accounts, or whether they can be used interactively. So I think that's probably one of the reasons they got in there, because more and more as you run code, as you said, applications have and code has access to run, and so the entire system runs. So it's a lot more important, I think, than it was before.
Yeah, I've had companies have difficulty just even inventorying all the accounts they have in these environments, actually just pulling out every single type of systems account that exists and what it's doing and what permissions it has, because a lot of the time the environment will create these accounts by virtue of it needing them to function. So you upload your code to an instance, the instance creates the accounts that allows it to run, and you don't even know what it's done. So it can be complex to try and dig the data out to make sure they're secure and relevant.
So many serverless systems rely on events or triggers like messages or file uploads. What challenge does this create when checking whether those triggers are secure?
You have to check out what data is going into these triggers. When they trigger, what data are they? A, what data are they triggering on? And B, what are they doing once they're triggered? From a security point of view, I guess, you're auditing them, you have to look at what the event's doing. Is it, if it's an alert, security alert, is it alerting on the right thing? And what data's in the payload of that alert? Anything that could be relevant to attacker.
How can organizations keep strong control over changes to their systems when serverless functions are deployed automatically through development pipelines?
Well, your pipeline itself is the privileged system. So you're controlling your pipeline, you're controlling your production, in my opinion.
Yeah, you have to. You're going to end up in those system accounts again, aren't you? Because pipelines will have accounts to deploy what they need to deploy, and we will, as assessors, we will look at that whole pipeline. What is it? We'll follow that process through, just like it was a manual process by a person. We'll follow the pipeline process through. It's the same kind of thing to assess it.
Speaking of manual control, I think one of those things that you would look at here is either prevent or alert on if there's a manual change or somebody's trying to take over manually, because then it's something that's not expected. It's out of like the normal routine.
Yeah, absolutely. With automated pipelines, if there's a manual trigger, then somebody should be looking at why.
So are there any common mistakes that companies make when trying to separate cardholder data from the rest of their systems in a serverless environment, and how can they prevent those issues?
So segmentation is a big issue with these environments, because when you put code into these environments, you upload code to an instance or a function, and then you upload code to other functions, then you allow these functions to communicate with each other, and suddenly it's that intercommunication between functions and APIs whereby you haven't got the correct segmentation you'd normally expect if you were doing it with firewalls and infrastructure. So you have to look carefully at how the different functions within these applications talk to each other and how they communicate, and how you can restrict that to make sure functions that don't need to be in scope aren't.
Yeah. It's easy so which function handles cardholder data, but then it's easy to ignore every service that touches it or interacts with it, logging, alerting, which share. So it's the same alerting system or log management for non-CD and CD systems, or has something that has nothing to do with either payment or securing cardholder data unintentionally pulls into scope. And it takes, I think, careful planning to make sure that this is mapped out properly.
Things like debugging functions as well. You'll find there are debugging functions up there designed to work out what bits are doing for the developers, and if they're touching stuff they shouldn't do, hey presto, you've got a lack of segmentation between systems that shouldn't have communication.
How should organizations check for weaknesses in serverless systems when the usual approach of scanning servers doesn't really apply?
Scanning in serverless. Yeah, this is an interesting one.
Well, you scan code. Well, you still need to make sure your dependencies are secure, your configuration is secure, even though you're sort of relying on secure configuration, I think, from your provider. But it's still, I think, in my opinion, prudent to scan.
Yeah, you can do application pen testing and application vulnerability scanning, and you absolutely should do. You're just relying upon the provider to do the infrastructure stuff that you would have traditionally done yourself. Scanning for patches and bugs and issues in the underlying operating system is outside of your responsibility now. Doesn't mean you haven't got a responsibility to make sure your code's got no vulnerabilities in it.
For a traditional environment, your weakness could, or in a scan, it comes up that your OS is not patched to the latest level. For a serverless environment, is your permissions are off, or there's any sort of misconfiguration that will come out in the scan.
Yeah, you're pulling in a code library that's no longer being updated, or an outdated dependency on something else. Yeah, there's those kind of things.
How do you assess PCI compliance when an organization depends on cloud services that themselves run on serverless technology?
Oh, so your service provider then engages a provider that's serverless. I guess it doesn't, as long as your provider's compliant, it doesn't really matter. If you're engaging a cloud provider and they themselves are engaging other providers that are serverless, you don't really care so much as long as your provider's compliant.
You don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
Although probably in the AOC, there's a section of description of the environment, so that probably the assessor reflects to it. But yeah, otherwise, you just get a validated attestation, your responsibility matrix. I don't think
that you do anything different. You just make sure your provider's compliant and providing you all the information to proof of the compliance and what services they're giving you compliant, and you go on just as you would before.
What are the most common misunderstandings you encounter from teams who believe that using serverless technology means they have fewer PCI responsibilities?
Everything is provided by the provider. I'm done. I have nothing to do. It's all secure. They say it. It's written. Yeah.
Yeah, you get those. So you get like companies that provide IT services, and they rely on a cloud provider that is compliant. They don't do their own compliance. They go, well, we're using these guys and they're compliant. Yeah, but what about the bits you do? That's where you get the problems. It's like, we don't need to, because we're using a service that's compliant. And so you get companies relying on other providers' compliance without doing their own. I've had that discussion more times than I'd care to mention.
I think it's, as you said in the intro, that more and more clients of ours are going into this direction. And I think it's a good direction, but because it takes a lot of responsibility out of the merchant or service provider, whoever it is. But it's still, there's a lot to be done still. And the problem, I think, which through education, I think, and time probably, they will understand like where the responsibility lies between, okay, so this is something it's my responsibility to do, and this is something that it's been provided to me. But it takes time, I think, and it takes a lot of convincing from us.
Yes, it does.
How should organizations think about the risks tied to the external code and libraries that are often used inside serverless functions?
Well, dependencies are everything, right? In a serverless environment. So a vulnerable library equals to a vulnerable system production.
Yep.
And this is where I think organizations need to be extremely clear on what libraries exist, scan it continuously, and they have a mechanism to redeploy if need be.
Yeah, most modern coding environments are built upon libraries of stuff that people don't rewrite code that's already been done. They just pull it in, and that's where you get these dependencies and functions, and not entirely sure what you're using and whether it's secure or not. So it can get messy when you've got developers that just do pull in all these external code sources and stuff. And so sometimes you just go, well, we need to make sure we segment the bits that are in scope off so they're not accessing these libraries they don't need.
What advice would you give to organizations trying to move quickly and innovate while still meeting the strict requirements of PCI DSS?
Well, no. Actually, to be fair, with version 4, it's more flexible with customized validations and flexibility built in. You should be able to innovate and still remain compliant. I guess it depends what you're trying to do realistically. If you're trying to get very crazy and out there, then yeah, you might run into problems meeting the requirements. But with a suitable customized validation, you should be able to make most things compliant this day and age.
The customized validation is not as apparently, well, as of what was it, November last year, not as widely used as I think either of us thought. The PCI community meeting, they stated that globally there were like 20 customized validations submitted to the council since the inception of customized validation, which is like, 3 years now?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, it's nice to be, thinking, I think this is not really about innovate. It's like avoid pain. So like you have like a simpler solution or something that works better that may not be, black and white compliant with the standard as it's written. But it's more of like, I think companies don't, well, I don't know, I might be wrong, but I don't think they do it to innovate. I think they do it to make their life easy or easier.
Yeah. Trying to find easier ways of complying, easier ways of building these systems. Yeah, you're right. I think so.
So just sort of carrying on with that question of flexibility, with PCI DSS version 4 offering more flexibility in how controls can be met, how do you see serverless solutions fitting into this, and what sort of evidence would you look for as a QSA?
I mean, serverless does fit it. Serverless is, but I was doing serverless stuff environments under version 3. It wasn't easy to work it into the standard back then because it wasn't as flexible. But now, it's certainly, version 4 has no problem dealing with serverless environments being compliant. I mean, it remains to be seen what they do with version 5 whenever that pops up. I'm sure it will do at some point in the next year or so, maybe. Tibor, what do we think for version 5?
So, really?
I hear murmurings. I mean, it seems like they want to go down that more flexibility route, but again, it's so early days for version 5 because version 4 has only been settled for a year or two now. So I doubt we'll see a draft version 5 until next year, maybe after that. So yeah, I mean, version 4 is pretty flexible compared to the previous version and does very well with these types of environments.
So you don't think there's going to be an iteration of version 4 like 3 had, 3.1, 3.2, 3.2.1? So you think it's going to jump to another, like a major revision?
Personally, I think so. Generally, those iterations are only there to react to the environment, the security landscape. When something changes drastically in the security landscape, they have to react quickly, and so they do an iteration. Otherwise, I don't think they will. I think they'll continue with this flexibility that they brought in version 4. Yeah, I think what they did with version 4 was good. They kept the objectives as this is what we want to achieve, but then allowed you decent flexibility in how you do it, not what you do. And so as long as they maintain that for any future versions, the standard should be flexible enough to deal with whatever new innovative technology you want to throw at it, because the aim of the game is to secure it in this way, not the aim of the game is to achieve this type of level of security. Flexibility to do that is what they need. So I think, we'll see.
Yeah, it's a philosophical conversation, but I think the more interesting question is when are we going to say goodbye to pen altogether, or pen not being as valuable as it is now? If you say each transaction would generate a different pen I think that's more like I'm interested more what's going to happen then.
What's going to happen with the PCI DSS when things go that way? How are they going to handle that? Yeah. Well, watch this space. We'll see.
Well, I hope it's not before I go get retired. Then I don't need to worry about it because I need to
You're not anywhere near retirement, Tibor. Don't play that one.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate your time today and such an insightful and interesting discussion as always. If any of our listeners would like to ask Alastair and Tibor a question in a future episode, just follow the link in the description of this episode. It will take you to a form which you can fill out, or you can just pop your question in the comments. But thank you so much for your time again today, guys, and thank you everyone for listening. We shall see you next time. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.